My name is Hazel Mitchell, I'm 28, and I never thought I'd be hiding from my own family. 6 urgent calls light up my phone screen, but I can't bring myself to answer. They called me selfish when I wouldn't hand over $50,000 of my hard-earned savings to fund my sister's latest dream, an art gallery she has no experience to run. Now I've disappeared, and they're panicking. But for the first time in my life, I'm choosing me. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from, and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, if you've ever felt trapped by family expectations, you'll want to hear how this story unfolds. Growing up in suburban Minneapolis, I was always the responsible one. Our middle-class home looked perfect from the outside, 2-story colonial with a neatly trimmed lawn and a tire swing hanging from the oak tree in our front yard. But inside those walls, I learned early that my role was fixed. I was the helper, the fixer, the responsible daughter who would always put family first. My parents, Jessica and David Mitchell, weren't terrible people. That would make this story easier to tell. Mom worked as a dental hygienist, and Dad was in middle management at a manufacturing company. They provided for us, took us on annual camping trips to Lake Superior, and made sure we had decent clothes and school supplies. But there was always an unspoken hierarchy in our house, and at the top was my younger sister, Amber. For years my junior, Amber was the golden child from the moment she was born. Where I was practical and studious, she was vivacious and creative. While I was told to be sensible about my future, Amber was encouraged to follow her passions. This dynamic colored everything in our household. "Hazel, help your sister with her science project," Mom would say, even though I had my own homework waiting. "Hazel, let Amber have the last cookie." "Don't be difficult," Dad would sigh when I dared to reach for it myself. When I was 14, Dad lost his job during company downsizing. For 8 months, our family struggled financially. I took a job stocking shelves at the local grocery store after school and on weekends. My earnings, meant for my future college fund, went straight to helping with bills. "We need to pull together as a family," Mom explained as she took my paycheck. Meanwhile, Amber's dance lessons continued uninterrupted. By 16, I'd developed a talent for graphic design, spending hours on the family computer creating digital art. When I asked for a $200 graphics tablet to develop my skills, Mom shook her head. "We don't have money for hobbies right now, Hazel. Be practical." 2 weeks later, they spent $350 on a new outfit for Amber's dance recital. College brought no reprieve from this pattern. I worked 3 part-time jobs while studying graphic design at the state university, taking out loans to cover what my scholarships didn't. Meanwhile, my parents found money to cover Amber's full tuition at a private liberal arts college, where she changed her major 4 times in 2 years. "Your sister is finding herself," Mom explained when I questioned the expense. "You've always known what you wanted to do." During those years, I watched Amber cycle through phases with dizzying speed. There was her photography business that lasted 3 months before she abandoned the expensive camera our parents had purchased. Then came her fashion blog, which died after she realized it required consistent posting. Makeup artistry followed, then a brief obsession with becoming a yoga instructor, each passion funded by our parents until Amber's interest inevitably waned. Despite everything, I loved my family. I cherished the rare moments when Dad would take just me fishing at dawn, both of us silent in the early morning fog. I treasured the Christmas when Mom tracked down a vintage design book I'd mentioned months before. I adored Amber's infectious laugh and the way she could light up a room. These glimpses of genuine connection made the inequality harder to name, harder to fight against. They made me doubt my own feelings, wonder if I was simply being petty or jealous. By the time I graduated college, I had become the family's emotional support system as well as the designated success story. "Hazel will figure it out," became the refrain whenever a problem arose. My accomplishments were acknowledged briefly, then quickly overshadowed by Amber's latest crisis or inspiration. I carried a complex tangle of emotions through these years, love for my family mixed with resentment, loyalty battling with the growing desire to break free, and always the question echoing in my mind. Did they love me for who I was, or for what I could do for them? After graduation, I made the decision that changed everything. I moved to Chicago. 240 miles might not seem like much of a separation, but the psychological distance it created was immeasurable. For the first time, I couldn't be called upon at a moment's notice to babysit Amber's cat or help Dad with the yard work or listen to Mom complain about her coworkers. My first apartment was barely bigger than a closet, a 380-square-foot studio with a kitchenette and a bathroom where you could shower and brush your teeth simultaneously. The rent consumed nearly half my entry-level graphic design salary at a small marketing firm, but it was mine. No one could walk in without knocking. No one could borrow my things without asking. No one could demand my time or energy as a birthright. Those early years in Chicago were brutally difficult. The entry-level job barely covered my expenses, so I built a freelance business on the side, working nights and weekends. I survived on ramen noodles and coffee, going to networking events for the free appetizers. My social life consisted largely of professional mixers where I could hand out business cards. Dating was a luxury I couldn't afford, both in terms of time and emotional energy. During this period, I worked 80-plus-hour weeks, sometimes going days without leaving my apartment except to buy groceries. I dealt with clients who paid late or not at all, who demanded endless revisions, who called at midnight with emergencies that could have waited until morning. I battled imposter syndrome, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake striking out on my own. My big break came in the form of Carson Walker, owner of a small but growing chain of boutique coffee shops. He had seen a logo I designed for a local bakery and tracked me down. "I like your aesthetic," he said during our first meeting. "Clean but not cold. Modern without being trendy." The project he hired me for, complete rebranding of his 6 locations plus all packaging and marketing materials, paid more than I had made in the previous 3 months combined. More importantly, it gave my portfolio the showcase piece it needed. Carson became not just a client but a mentor, introducing me to other business owners and recommending my services. By my 3rd year in Chicago, I had enough steady clients to quit my day job. By year 4, I had hired 2 part-time assistants to handle administrative work and basic design tasks. By year 5, Mitchell Design Studio was grossing over $200,000 annually. The success came at a cost. I had developed chronic insomnia and occasional anxiety attacks. I had few close friends and hadn't had a relationship last longer than 3 months. My apartment, while now a proper 1-bedroom in a better neighborhood, was still sparsely furnished because I spent so little time there. But I had accomplished what I set out to do. I was financially independent and building something that was entirely mine. Throughout these years, my relationship with my family remained complicated. I visited Minneapolis for major holidays and called home once a week. Each visit and call held the same predictable pattern: brief questions about my business, which they never quite understood, followed by lengthy updates about Amber's latest venture and various family dramas I was now blessedly removed from. And there were the requests. They started small. Could I help Amber build a website for her short-lived jewelry-making business? Could I loan Dad $800 for car repairs? Could I design the program for Mom's church fundraiser, for free, of course? Each time, I said yes, telling myself that's what family does. The requests grew as my business did. When Amber needed $3,000 to enroll in a life-changing wellness coach certification program, my parents called me rather than dipping into their own retirement savings. When their roof needed replacing, somehow it became my responsibility to cover the $7,500 insurance deductible. "You're doing so well," Mom would say. "It's not like you have a family to support." Despite these financial drains, I managed to save $75,000 over 5 years, earmarked for a down payment on a condo. I wanted roots, a home that was truly mine. Chicago had become the place where I found myself, and I wanted to cement my commitment to the life I was building. I didn't tell my family about these savings. Something in me knew that what they didn't know about, they couldn't ask for. It was the first boundary I had ever set with them, even if it was a secret one. As my business thrived, my parents began to speak of my success as if it were a family achievement. We always knew Hazel would make something of herself, Dad would tell his friends within my hearing. She gets her work ethic from me. Mom would introduce me at church functions by saying, "This is my daughter Hazel, the one with her own business in Chicago," as if my accomplishments were hers to display. They were proud of me, yes, but not in a way that acknowledged my struggles or the distance I had deliberately placed between us. Their pride felt possessive, as if my success was family property. And in their minds, perhaps it was. What hurt most was that they never really asked about my dreams. They didn't know that I hoped to eventually shift from commercial work to more creative projects. They didn't ask about my goals or fears or the challenges I faced. They saw my business as a solution to family problems rather than as the hard-won result of my own efforts and ambitions. And through it all, Amber remained the emotional center of the family, her dreams still taking precedence over everything else. The fact that none of these dreams had materialized into anything lasting seemed not to matter. In our family, potential, Amber's potential, was always valued above achievement, specifically, my achievement. I was building a life on my own terms, but I was still tethered to old patterns, still responding to the unspoken expectation that my resources, financial and emotional, belonged in some essential way to my family. I was independent, but not free. I should have seen it coming. The family dinner last November had all the warning signs: Mom making my favorite lasagna, Dad bringing out a bottle of the good wine, Amber practically vibrating with excitement across the table. I was home for Thanksgiving, and they had waited until I was mellowed by food and family time before dropping the bomb. "I'm going to open an art gallery," Amber announced, clapping her hands together. At 22, my sister was undeniably charismatic, with her wavy auburn hair and animated expressions. "I found the perfect space in Uptown. The lease is available in January." I tried to keep my expression neutral as I took a sip of wine. Amber's perfect spaces had included, over the past few years, a food truck, abandoned before she even secured permits, a podcast studio, equipment gathering dust in our parents' basement, and most recently, plans for a home organizing business, forgotten after she failed to organize her own apartment. "That sounds interesting," I said carefully. "What kind of art will you feature?" "All kinds. Local artists, established names, maybe even some of your design work." Amber beamed at me. "I'm thinking of calling it Spectrum Gallery because it will showcase the full spectrum of artistic expression." "The location is prime real estate," Mom added, her voice tinged with the special excitement she reserved for Amber's ventures. "Right in the arts district, lots of foot traffic." "And what's your business plan?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Amber waved her hand dismissively. "I'll figure out the details as I go. You know I work best on intuition." Dad cleared his throat. "Well, that's actually something we wanted to discuss with you, Hazel." He exchanged glances with Mom and Amber. "The startup costs are substantial, and with your business doing so well." And there it was. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest as I realized why I'd been invited for this special family dinner. "We were hoping you might invest in Amber's gallery," Mom said, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "She needs about $50,000 to get started properly, for the deposit, renovations, initial inventory, marketing." I nearly choked on my wine. $50,000? "It's an investment," Amber emphasized, leaning forward. "You'll get a return once the gallery takes off." "And it will take off, Hazel. I can feel it. This is different from my other projects. This is my calling." I'd heard this before, about the yoga studio, about the jewelry business, about the wellness coaching. Each time, Amber had been absolutely convinced that she had found her purpose in life. Each time, her enthusiasm had fizzled within months. "Have you researched the art market in Minneapolis?" I asked. "Or the failure rate of new galleries? Or how to price artwork and what commission structures are standard? Or how to build relationships with artists? Or the insurance requirements for a space displaying valuable work?" Amber's face fell. "Why are you being so negative? I thought you'd be happy for me." I am happy that you're excited about something, I said carefully. But running a gallery is incredibly complex. It's not something you can figure out as you go. That's why she needs proper funding, Mom interjected. With enough startup capital, she can hire people who know the business side. I took a deep breath. I've worked with several gallery clients. Even established galleries are struggling right now. The market is oversaturated, and most art sales are moving online. This is why we need brick-and-mortar spaces. Amber exclaimed. To preserve the experience of seeing art in person. I agree, but that doesn't change the economic reality, I replied, feeling like the villain in their narrative. Even if I wanted to invest, which I'm not saying I do, $50,000 wouldn't be enough to sustain a gallery until it becomes profitable, which could take years if it happens at all. Dad's expression hardened. Family helps family, Hazel. We supported you through college. I worked 3 jobs through college, I reminded him, feeling heat rise in my face. And I've repaid every penny you loaned me, plus interest. This isn't about money, Mom said, though it very clearly was. It's about believing in your sister. For the next hour, the conversation circled around this theme. I offered alternatives. I could help Amber with a business plan, create branding materials for free, even loan her a smaller amount like $5,000 to test the concept with a pop-up exhibition. Each suggestion was dismissed as insufficient commitment to Amber's vision. Either you believe in me or you don't, Amber finally said, tears welling in her eyes. I thought of all people, you would understand what it means to follow your dream. I do understand, I said, my frustration mounting. That's why I know it takes more than money and enthusiasm. It takes research, planning, and a realistic approach. You've changed since you moved to Chicago, Mom said with disappointment heavy in her voice. You've become hard. What I couldn't tell them was that I knew about the art gallery space Amber had her eye on. I had a client in Minneapolis who had considered the same location 6 months earlier and abandoned the idea after learning about the building's structural issues and the landlord's reputation for sudden rent increases. I had done my own research and discovered that 3 previous galleries had failed in that very location within the past decade. I also couldn't tell them that my savings, the $75,000 I had meticulously accumulated, represented years of sacrifice and planning. That money was my security, my future, the foundation of the life I was building. And now they expected me to hand over 2/3 of it for a business venture that had virtually no chance of success. As I drove back to my hotel that night, I received a barrage of texts from Amber. I guess your fancy Chicago life matters more than your sister's dreams. Mom is crying because of you. I would have done this for you in a heartbeat. The last one stung because it was so patently untrue. Amber had never done anything similar for me. She had never worked to support the family during tough times, never contributed to my education, never even considered how her constant demands affected others. The next morning, I met Amber for coffee, hoping to have a more reasonable conversation one-on-one. I brought printouts about small business loans, grant opportunities for arts organizations, and alternative approaches to entering the gallery world, like partnering with established galleries or starting with online sales and pop-up events. This is your way of saying no again, she said, pushing the papers away without looking at them. You just can't stand to see me succeed at something. That's not true, I protested. I want you to succeed, which is why I'm suggesting sustainable approaches. You have the money, she said flatly. You're choosing not to help me. That's selfish, Hazel. Plain and simple. As I watched her storm out of the coffee shop, I realized that in my family's eyes, my success had value only insofar as it could serve Amber's aspirations. My years of hard work, my careful planning, my expertise in business, none of it mattered except as a resource to be tapped for the next family project. In that moment, something broke inside me. A lifetime of compliance, of putting family first at my own expense, of being the responsible one who would always be there to pick up the pieces. I paid for my untouched coffee and walked out into the cold Minneapolis morning, knowing that nothing would ever be the same. The true explosion came 3 days later, at what was supposed to be a farewell dinner before I returned to Chicago. The tension from our previous conversations hung in the air as we picked at Mom's pot roast. "I've been thinking about your situation, Hazel," Mom began, as if my refusal to fund Amber's gallery was a problem I was having rather than a boundary I was setting. "I spoke with Pastor Dave about it, and he reminded me of the parable of the talents." I set down my fork. "You discussed my private financial matters with your pastor?" She continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Those who have been blessed with abundance have a responsibility to share with others. To bury your treasure instead of helping your sister multiply her talents is, well, it's not what we raised you to do." "I've worked for every dollar I have," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "Nothing was handed to me." "And yet you won't extend the same opportunity to your sister," Dad added, his disappointment evident. "We always taught you girls to support each other." Amber sat silently, tears streaming down her face, a performance I had seen countless times when things weren't going her way. "I've offered support," I said. "Just not a blank check." $50,000 is nothing to you now," Mom insisted. "Your business makes that in what, a month?" The assumption was so wildly off base that I almost laughed. "That's not how business finances work. Revenue isn't profit, and profit isn't personal income." "Stop hiding behind business jargon," Dad said. "This is about family." "Yes, it is," I agreed, surprising them. "It's about how this family has always had different rules for Amber and me. It's about how my role has always been to give and Amber's has been to take." Amber's tears stopped abruptly. "That's such a lie. You're just jealous because Mom and Dad are supportive of my dreams while you had to go be Ms. Independent." "Supportive?" I echoed. "They paid your full college tuition while I worked 3 jobs. They buy you new cars while I take public transportation. They fund every fleeting interest you have while I had to fight for every opportunity." "That's not support, that's enabling." The room fell silent. I had never spoken so bluntly before, had never named the dynamic that had shaped our family for decades. Mom recovered first. "I can't believe how ungrateful you've become," she said, her voice cold. "After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me that you haven't done twice over for Amber?" I asked, genuinely curious if they even saw the disparity. "We gave you life, a home, an education," Dad began. "Basic parental obligations," I interrupted. "And the education I largely paid for myself." "You're not the daughter I raised," he said, his face flushed with anger. "The Hazel I raised wouldn't be so selfish." The word hung in the air between us. Selfish. After a lifetime of putting my family's needs before my own, of working while Amber played, of giving when I had little to spare, I was the selfish one. "Maybe I'm not the daughter you raised," I finally said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Maybe I've become someone who values herself enough to set boundaries." "Boundaries?" Mom scoffed. "Is that some therapy nonsense you picked up in Chicago?" "Family doesn't have boundaries, Hazel. Family is all in, all the time." "That's not healthy," I said quietly. "Neither is abandoning your family when they need you," Amber shot back. I looked at my sister. Still beautiful in her self-absorption, still certain that her desires trumped everyone else's needs. "I haven't abandoned anyone. I've simply said no to one request." "A critical request," Mom insisted. "This gallery is Amber's future. Until she gets bored with it in 3 months like every other venture," I said, immediately regretting the harshness of my words even though they contained truth. Amber pushed away from the table violently. "You're cruel, Hazel. You've always been jealous of me, always resented that Mom and Dad love me." "Stop," I said, suddenly exhausted. "This isn't productive." But the dam had broken. Years of unspoken resentment flooded the room as Amber listed all the ways I had supposedly wronged her throughout our lives, from borrowing her sweater in high school without asking to abandoning the family by moving to Chicago. Mom joined in, rewriting history to cast me as the selfish villain and Amber as the perpetual victim. Dad mostly stayed silent, but his silence was its own form of condemnation. I felt a strange detachment as I watched them, as if I were observing a play rather than participating in a family meltdown. Their accusations grew increasingly dramatic and disconnected from reality. According to them, I had always been cold, always been difficult, always been jealous of Amber's natural gifts. My success was attributed to ruthlessness rather than hard work. My independence was labeled as rejection of family rather than healthy adulthood. When I finally stood to leave, Mom grabbed my arm. "If you walk out that door without resolving this, don't bother coming back for Christmas." It was the first time she had ever threatened to exclude me from a family gathering. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. "I think we all need time to cool down," I said, gently removing her hand from my arm. "I'll call you when I'm back in Chicago." The drive to my hotel was a blur. Once inside my room, I collapsed on the bed, my body shaking with emotion. Years of suppressed feelings, hurt, anger, disappointment, crashed over me in waves. For the first time in my adult life, I allowed myself to sob openly, releasing decades of pain. When the tears finally subsided, I checked my phone to find it flooded with messages. Amber had already taken to social media, posting a vague but pointed message about toxic family members who only care about themselves. Several relatives had texted me, having heard a version of events that undoubtedly cast me as the villain. "Cousin Beth, how could you do this to Amber? She's devastated." "Uncle Jim, family first, Hazel. Thought you knew that." "Aunt Patty, your mother is in tears. Call her immediately." No one had asked for my side of the story. No one had considered that there might be valid reasons for my refusal. In the court of family opinion, I had already been tried and convicted of the ultimate crime: putting my own needs above Amber's wants. The panic attack hit me without warning. My chest constricted, my breathing became shallow, and the room seemed to spin around me. I slid to the floor, back against the bed, fighting to draw air into my lungs. The physical manifestation of years of emotional pressure crashed through my body, leaving me gasping and disoriented. In that moment of crisis, one thought emerged with startling clarity: I couldn't continue this pattern. Something had to change. As my breathing slowly normalized, I opened my laptop and began searching flights back to Chicago. I needed to go home, my real home, not the house of emotional manipulation I had just left. But before I could complete the booking, my phone rang. It was Dad. "Your mother didn't mean what she said," he began, his voice weary. "You know how she gets when she's upset." "I do know," I said. "That's part of the problem. Everyone walks on eggshells around her and Amber's emotions, while mine are dismissed or ignored. That's not fair, Hazel. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my dreams, Dad? When was the last time you stood up for me when Mom or Amber was being unreasonable?" His silence was answer enough. "I need to go," I said. "We'll talk later." Before he could respond, I ended the call and turned off my phone. I needed space to think clearly, away from their influence. Later that night, as I lay awake in my hotel room, I received an email that broke me. It was from a family friend who worked at my parents' bank, warning me in confidence that my parents had taken out a second mortgage on their house to fund Amber's gallery. "They're counting on you to help if things go south," he wrote. "Just thought you should know what you're saying no to." The implication was clear: if Amber's gallery failed, when it failed, I would be expected to save my parents from financial ruin. The weight of their expectations, their manipulations, their refusal to see me as separate from their needs crushed down on me like a physical force. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I didn't go back to Chicago the next day as planned. Instead, I drove north, away from Minneapolis, away from the suffocating expectations that had defined my life for 28 years. I needed clarity, and I knew I wouldn't find it within reach of my family's influence. The rental cabin I found online was 3 hours north of the city, perched on the edge of a frozen lake near the Boundary Waters. It was off-season for tourists, and the property manager seemed surprised to have a booking in November. "Not much to do up here this time of year," he warned when I called to confirm. That's exactly what I need, I replied. Before I left cellular coverage, I sent a brief text to my assistant in Chicago, taking 2 weeks personal time. Business protocols in place. We'll check email occasionally. I had built my business to function without my constant presence, another lesson in self-preservation I had learned over the years. To my family, I sent only this: I need space to think. Please respect that. I'm safe and will be in touch when I'm ready. Then I turned off my phone. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, a one-room structure with a stone fireplace, small kitchen, and a wall of windows facing the lake. The silence was immediate and profound. No traffic noise, no neighbors, no family drama, just the occasional call of a loon and the whisper of wind through bare branches. For the first day, I did almost nothing. I sat by the fire, drank tea, and stared out at the frozen landscape. My mind, accustomed to constant activity and problem-solving, resisted the stillness at first, generating anxious thoughts about work, about the confrontation with my family, about what people might think of my sudden disappearance. Gradually, as the hours passed, those thoughts subsided. The perpetual tension I carried in my shoulders and jaw began to release. I slept for 12 hours that first night, the deepest sleep I'd had in years. On the second day, I found a sketchbook in my bag, something I always carried but rarely used. With no agenda or deadline, I began to draw, first the view from my window, then images from memory, then abstract patterns that seemed to emerge from my subconscious. The creative flow I had once loved, before design became a business rather than a passion, returned slowly, tentatively. By the third day, I had established a rhythm. Mornings for walking along the frozen lakeshore, afternoons for reading books I had downloaded about boundaries and family systems, evenings for sketching and journaling. I began to write down memories from childhood, examining them from my adult perspective, recognizing patterns I had been too close to see. I wrote about the Christmas when I was 9 and Amber was 5. I had asked for art supplies and received practical clothes instead, while Amber got the exact doll collection she had requested. I wrote about high school graduation, when my parents threw Amber an elaborate party because she had worked so hard to pass her classes, while my honor status had been acknowledged with a simple dinner out. I wrote about the countless times I had altered my plans, my needs, my very self to accommodate my family's expectations. The journal became a catalog of inequities, but also a map of my own complicity. I had allowed this dynamic to continue into adulthood. I had maintained the role assigned to me out of habit, out of love, out of fear of conflict. I had enabled their behavior as surely as they had enabled Amber's. On day 5, I ventured into the small town 10 miles from my cabin, needing supplies and perhaps a hint of human contact. At the general store, I met Mabel, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through social niceties. "You're staying at the Peterson cabin," she said as she rang up my groceries. It wasn't a question. Yes, I admitted. I needed some quiet time. She nodded knowingly. Most folks who come up here alone in November are running from something or looking for something. Sometimes both. Her perception startled me into honesty. Family complications, I offered. Ah, she said, handing me my change. The complications that run deepest. Then, with the directness of someone who has lived long enough to dispense with small talk, whatever they did or whatever you did, remember that healing doesn't require you to put yourself back in harm's way. I thought about Mabel's words as I drove back to the cabin. Was I in harm's way with my family? Not physically, certainly, but emotionally? The panic attack in the hotel room suggested yes. In my second week at the cabin, I began to sketch designs for a project I had been dreaming about for years, a series of illustrated stories about resilience and finding one's path. Not for clients, not for family, but for myself. As I worked, I felt a familiar joy return, the pure creative pleasure I had known as a child before art became work, before creativity became a resource to be mined by others. I also reached out to a few trusted friends, turning on my phone briefly to send reassuring messages and receive their support in return. Proud of you for taking space, texted Naomi, my closest friend in Chicago. Your family trained you to be their solution provider. Breaking that pattern is brave. Take all the time you need, wrote Carson, my mentor client. The business is fine. You deserve this break. Their messages affirmed what I was slowly coming to understand: my value did not lie in what I could provide for others. I deserved to exist for myself, to prioritize my own well-being, to set boundaries that protected my peace. On the last morning of my self-imposed retreat, I sat on the dock bundled against the cold, watching the sun rise over the frozen lake. The clarity I had been seeking had arrived not in a sudden epiphany but in the gradual settling of my thoughts, like sediment in still water. I knew what I needed to do. I needed to return to the life I had built, to the home that was truly mine, and from that position of strength, establish new terms for my relationship with my family. I could love them without capitulating to them. I could support them without sacrificing myself. As I packed my car to leave, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The burden of impossible expectations had been, if not entirely lifted, at least recognized for what it was, a weight I could choose to set down. I turned on my phone as I approached Minneapolis, intending to check in briefly before the long drive back to Chicago. The screen lit up with notifications: 6 missed calls from my parents and sister within the past hour, 42 text messages, 17 voicemails spanning the 2 weeks of my absence. The content ranged from anger to worry to guilt-inducing pleas. The most recent messages, however, had a different tone, urgency tinged with panic. Please call immediately. The gallery fell through. We need you. Just like that, they were pulling me back into the cycle. But this time I saw it clearly for what it was. And this time I had the strength to respond differently. I didn't call immediately as demanded. Instead, I checked into a hotel in Minneapolis, ordered room service, and methodically worked through the backlog of messages. The story emerged in fragments. Amber had signed a lease for the gallery space despite my warnings, putting down a non-refundable deposit using the money from my parents' second mortgage. A building inspection had subsequently revealed extensive code violations that would cost tens of thousands of dollars to address. The landlord was refusing to return the deposit, and Amber had already commissioned several local artists to create pieces for the opening exhibition. In other words, it was exactly the scenario I had warned against, happening even faster than I had anticipated. My mother's most recent voicemail was tear-filled: Hazel, please. We don't know what to do. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. Amber hasn't gotten out of bed in 2 days. We need you to help us figure this out. Help us figure this out. Not we miss you or we're sorry for how we treated you. Just another demand for me to fix their problems. I slept on it, allowing myself the luxury of not responding immediately. In the morning, I texted them all: I'll meet you at Riverside Coffee Shop at 2 p.m. today. Just the 4 of us. I chose a public location deliberately, a neutral space where emotional outbursts would be contained by social norms. I arrived 20 minutes early, selected a table in the corner with good sightlines to the door, and ordered a chai latte that I didn't really want but that gave me something to do with my hands. They arrived as a unit, my mother leading the way with an expression of determined concern, my father following with stooped shoulders, Amber trailing behind, eyes red-rimmed and accusatory. Where have you been? Mom demanded as they sat down. We've been worried sick. I told you I needed space, I said calmly. I took it. For 2 weeks? Amber's voice cracked. While everything fell apart? I looked at my sister, still beautiful in her distress, still centered in her own narrative where she was the protagonist and everyone else was supporting cast. Your gallery situation isn't my crisis to manage, I said, keeping my voice level. But I am sorry you're going through a difficult time. Sorry enough to help? Dad asked, a hint of his old authority creeping into his tone. I took a deep breath. I'm here to talk, but first I need to establish some ground rules. I won't be yelled at. I won't be manipulated with guilt. And I won't be making any financial decisions today. Mom's face darkened. So you came back just to continue being selfish? Setting boundaries isn't selfish, I replied, mentally thanking the authors of the books I'd read during my retreat. It's necessary for healthy relationships. We don't have time for therapy speak, Dad cut in. We have real problems. The bank is threatening foreclosure if we miss another mortgage payment. And that's devastating, I acknowledged. But it's the result of choices you and Mom made, taking out a second mortgage without a solid business plan. To support your sister. Mom interjected. Yes, I agreed. A choice you made knowing the risks. Just as I've made choices about my finances based on my priorities and goals. Amber, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly burst into tears. I know I messed up, okay? Is that what you want to hear? That you were right and I was wrong? This isn't about being right, I said gently. It's about recognizing patterns that aren't working for any of us. What patterns? Dad demanded. The pattern where Amber has a dream, you and Mom fund it without question, it fails, and then everyone turns to me to clean up the mess. The pattern where my role is to sacrifice my needs for everyone else's wants. The pattern where I'm only valued for what I can give, not who I am. A heavy silence fell over the table. For perhaps the first time, I had named our family dynamic plainly, without anger but without sugarcoating it either. That's not true, Mom said, but her protest sounded weak even to her own ears. We love you for you. I believe you love me, I said. But you don't respect me. You don't see me as separate from what I can do for you. And what about what we've done for you? Dad countered. We raised you, supported you. Yes, you did, I acknowledged. And I'm grateful for that. But parenthood doesn't create a lifetime debt. It doesn't mean I'm obligated to fund Amber's ventures or save you from financial decisions I cautioned against. Amber wiped her eyes. So you're just going to let the bank take Mom and Dad's house? Let my credit be ruined forever? Let those artists who are counting on the gallery lose their commissions? The old guilt tactics, right on cue. 6 months ago, they would have worked. 2 weeks ago, they might have swayed me. Today, I saw them clearly for what they were. I didn't create this situation, I said firmly. But I am willing to help in ways that don't perpetuate unhealthy patterns. I laid out what I was willing to do, help them negotiate with the landlord. I had contacts in commercial real estate who might be able to intervene. Speak with the artists about alternative exhibition opportunities, and connect my parents with a financial advisor who specialized in debt management and retirement planning. What about money? Mom asked bluntly. We need at least $30,000 to get out of this mess. I won't be providing that, I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. Not as a gift, not as a loan. I'm breaking the cycle. Then what good are you? Amber snapped, pushing back from the table. If you won't help us when we really need it, what kind of sister are you? The kind who is learning to help in ways that actually help, not ways that enable, I replied. The kind who loves you enough to say no when saying yes would hurt us all in the long run. Mom stood up to follow Amber. I don't recognize you anymore, Hazel. Maybe you're seeing the real me for the first time, I suggested. The me that exists outside of what I can do for this family. Dad remained seated as they stormed out. For a moment, I thought he might understand, might acknowledge the truth of what I was saying. Instead, he just looked tired. You've always been stubborn, he said finally. Just like me. Yes, I agreed. But I'm using that stubbornness to build a healthier life, not to cling to patterns that hurt everyone involved. He shook his head and stood. I hope your principles keep you warm at night when you've thrown away your family. As he walked away, I called after him, I haven't thrown away anything. I'm still here, Dad. Just with boundaries. He didn't turn back. I sat alone in the coffee shop, expecting to feel devastated. Instead, I felt an unexpected peace. For the first time, I had spoken my truth without anger, without blame, but also without compromise. I had offered genuine help while maintaining my boundaries. The fact that they couldn't accept help on those terms was painful but illuminating. I returned to Chicago the next day, to my apartment and my business and the life I had built. I didn't know what would happen with my family, whether they would reflect on what I had said or simply cast me as the villain in their narrative. What I did know was that I had changed, fundamentally and permanently. I had broken a lifetime pattern of compliance and people-pleasing. I had claimed my right to set boundaries, to exist for myself, to be valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. The road ahead would be difficult. Family systems don't change overnight, and old patterns die hard. But for the first time in my life, I was walking that road on my own terms, with my eyes wide open. 6 months have passed since that day in the coffee shop. The winter has given way to spring, and with the changing season has come unexpected growth in my family relationships, not the kind I would have predicted, but growth nonetheless. My predictions about Amber's gallery came true, unfortunately. Without proper funding or planning, the venture collapsed before it even opened. The landlord eventually returned a portion of the deposit after my real estate contact intervened. The commissioned artists found other venues for their work, thanks to introductions I made to legitimate gallery owners in Minneapolis. My parents worked with the financial advisor I recommended and developed a plan to manage their debt, though they will be feeling the effects of that second mortgage for years to come. What I didn't predict was how this crisis would force certain truths into the light. 2 weeks after our confrontation, I received an email from my Aunt Susan. My father's sister, who had always been kind to me but never particularly close. "I've watched this pattern with your sister for years," she wrote. "You're the first person brave enough to name it and step out of it. I respect that enormously." Her message was the first external validation I'd received from anyone in the family. We began corresponding regularly, and through her, I gained insights into my father's childhood and the patterns he had inherited from his own parents. Understanding the generational nature of our family dynamic didn't excuse it but helped me contextualize it with more compassion. My relationship with my immediate family evolved slowly and unevenly. For the first month, communication was minimal and strained. My mother's texts were cold and formal. My father didn't reach out at all. Amber alternated between angry accusations and tearful pleas for reconciliation on her terms. I maintained my boundaries calmly and consistently. I responded to messages within reason but didn't engage with manipulation tactics. I sent birthday and holiday gifts but declined invitations that felt premature or potentially harmful. I focused on building a life that wasn't defined by my role as the family fixer. That life expanded in ways I hadn't anticipated. With the mental and emotional energy previously consumed by family drama, I found space to pursue long-dormant passions. I started a creative workshop for underprivileged kids on Chicago's South Side, teaching basic design skills and creative problem-solving. I used a portion of my savings, not the $50,000 Amber had demanded, but a meaningful amount, to fund scholarships for promising students who couldn't afford art supplies or software. My business evolved too. I became more selective about clients, choosing projects that aligned with my values rather than just my bank account. I hired a full-time assistant and a junior designer, creating space in my schedule for the illustrated stories I had begun sketching at the cabin. To my surprise, this more intentional approach actually increased my business's profitability while decreasing my stress levels. I began therapy, something I had considered for years but always pushed aside as a luxury I didn't have time for. Working with Dr. Levine, I unpacked the complex web of family dynamics, codependency, and people-pleasing tendencies that had shaped my identity. I learned to recognize the voice in my head that still whispered I was selfish whenever I prioritized my needs. I practiced sitting with the discomfort of disappointing others without rushing to fix their feelings. 3 months after our confrontation, my father called. The conversation was awkward but significant. "Your Aunt Susan has been talking sense to me," he said gruffly. "Made me see some things about how we've treated you." It wasn't exactly an apology, but for my proud father, it was monumental. We began speaking weekly, our conversations careful but gradually warming. He shared stories from his own childhood that helped me understand his tendency to keep peace at any cost. I told him about my art workshops, and to my surprise, he expressed genuine interest. "You always did have a gift for teaching," he said, recalling how I'd helped neighborhood kids with art projects when I was a teenager. It was the first time he had ever acknowledged that aspect of my identity. My mother took longer to come around. The turning point came 4 months after our confrontation, when I flew to Minneapolis for Aunt Susan's birthday. Mom and I found ourselves alone in Susan's kitchen, preparing appetizers in awkward silence. "I don't know how to be a mother to you anymore," she finally said, her voice small. "You've changed all the rules." "I haven't changed the rules," I replied gently. "I've just stopped playing a game that was hurting me." She was quiet for a long moment. "I never meant to hurt you," she said finally. "I thought I was doing what mothers are supposed to do, supporting my children." "You supported us differently," I pointed out. "Amber got unconditional backing for whatever she wanted. I got expectations and responsibilities. Mom didn't deny it, which was progress. I guess I thought you didn't need the same kind of support because you were always so capable." "Being capable doesn't mean not needing support," I said. "It just meant I learned to stop asking for it." We didn't resolve everything in that conversation, but it opened a door. Mom began texting me about everyday things instead of crises. She asked questions about my life and actually listened to the answers. Small steps, but meaningful ones. As for Amber, our relationship remained the most complicated. Her initial response to my boundaries was to double down on viewing herself as the victim. She posted passive-aggressive social media updates about toxic family members and conditional love. When those didn't elicit the desired response from me, she tried a different approach, sending me elaborate apologies followed immediately by new requests for help or money. I maintained my position with compassion but firmness. I didn't engage with the social media drama. I acknowledged her apologies but didn't immediately rush back into the old dynamic. When she asked for help, I offered the kind I was willing to give: advice, connections, emotional support, rather than financial bailouts. Slowly, incrementally, something shifted. Perhaps it was seeing that her usual tactics weren't working, or maybe it was the reality check of the failed gallery, but Amber began to approach our relationship differently. She started therapy of her own, began working a steady job for the first time in her adult life, and gradually reduced the drama and demands in our interactions. 2 weeks ago, she called me with news. "I'm taking classes at the community college," she said, a new maturity in her voice. "Business administration. I figured if I'm going to try another venture someday, I should understand how they actually work." "That's great, Amber," I said, genuinely proud of her. "That shows real commitment." "Yeah, well," she hesitated. "I kind of realized you were right. About needing to plan and prepare, not just jump into things." It wasn't a full acknowledgement of the pattern or her role in it, but it was a start. As for me, I built a life I couldn't have imagined 6 months ago, one with healthy boundaries, meaningful work, and relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I've discovered that setting limits isn't selfish but necessary for genuine connection. I've learned that saying no can be an act of love, for others and for myself. My family is still my family, with all the complexity and history that entails. We're still learning how to relate to each other in this new landscape. There are setbacks and old patterns that resurface. There are moments when I doubt my decisions, when the weight of family expectation feels crushing. But I no longer disappear under that weight. I stand firm in the knowledge that my value isn't determined by what I can give or do for others. I am enough, just as I am. So if you're watching this and recognizing your own family patterns in my story, know that change is possible. It isn't easy or quick or linear, but it is possible. You have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to exist for yourself, not just as a resource for others. You have the right to be valued for who you are, not just what you can provide. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you had to set difficult boundaries with family? What helped you find the courage to break unhealthy patterns? And if you're still in the process of finding that courage, what support do you need? Don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. And remember, taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's the foundation for any healthy relationship. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength and clarity on your own journey towards self-worth and healthy boundaries.